Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics with a really fun and practical project today using another June Tailor pre-printed batting kit. We love doing June Tailor projects. You can see this table runner. It's really striking on the table. This is Postcard Holiday from P&B Textiles. It is easily one of my favorites of the season. You can see other projects we've done, the folded star hot pads and both the round and the square, the hanging towel. I love that. I think I know we did that in a couple different colorways. And then over here, we did those cathedral window ornaments. All of those have supporting videos. So if any of those are of interest to you, be sure to check those out. Subscribe if you haven't already done that. You know, when I fell in love with the fabric collection, I love to have that whole home coordinated look. So whether you're maybe in the kitchen or the dining room or maybe even a bedroom or bathroom, everything looks really nicely coordinated. So if you too like that, Postcard Holiday is one to be sure to check out. These are just some of the projects that we've done with that collection. The thing I love about June Tailor's pre-printed batting is it's quilt as you go. As you know, normally we're piecing either a quilt top or a table runner top, and then later we're adding the batting and the backing, and we have to quilt that and then later bind it. I love that we're really quilting this as we go, and so really in the end, the only thing left to do is to put the binding on. And it makes it really affordable too. You know, I am not an accomplished long arm quilter by any means. I send my quilts out every single time. And of course, there's an expense associated with that. So I like that I can now have a project to display today. I don't have to wait and send it out. So if you've ever used a June Tailor product, a batting, you know it comes in a kit. And of course, with this one, Postcard Holiday, we have some limited kits remaining. Be sure to pick that up if you love that look. And we also have other Morning Blend table runner kits available for different times of the year as well. But if you're just like, you know what, I just want to get that batting and do my own thing, when you get your batting, it'll be folded up just like this. And you know what? Don't let those wrinkles stress you out. They stressed me out the first time I opened up a June Tailor project. And the first thing I went to grab for was my iron. And that's one of the first things they say in their instructions as to not do. They specifically say to not iron that. It could distort or shrink the batting. Here's what I've learned about all of the June Tailor pre-printed batting projects. The more you handle those, the more you work with those, everything will just kind of smooth out eventually. And then once you have everything sewn down to the top, then you can go ahead and iron everything nice and smooth. So don't let that stress you out too much. So this is what your kit would look like. All your fabrics are nicely folded inside. But let's just jump into the process of how do we do this? How is this quilt as you go thing work? Well, let me grab out one of the ones we've already kind of gotten started. One of the first steps they have you do, and this is the backing that would be included in your kit, is you're just going to want to put a backing fabric on the back of your batting right away. And you can see this one's got wrinkles, but you'll see as we work with this, it will start to smooth out. You could either just pin that, but I think they mentioned in their instructions to use a basting spray. I like to use basting sprays outside. They can be a little bit fumey. So go ahead and just do your basting spray and then get that on the back of your batting. One thing that we have found is really helpful, and you might be able to see that on the overhead camera, is we just stitch down on this line all the way around and to the points just to secure that. But it's more of later on when we want to trim everything up It's nice to visually be able to turn to the back of the project and see where we stitch down. More on that later on. I don't think that instruction is included in your pattern, but it's a pro tip from our sewing room. We do it pretty much every time, because later on, some of these strips that extend beyond here, it makes it very difficult to see where to cut because the fabric is extending beyond that. So as I said, more to come. So let's take a look at our batting. I see June Tailor's done a great job of numbering that for us. So if you've ever done paint by numbers, this is quilting by numbers. So for number 1, we would be putting our piece down here. Our instructions, of course, are letting us know what size do we cut that. So if you're looking at the Quilt As You Go instructions for Morning Blend, they're saying that center square is what we're designating as fabric A. And they're saying, okay, for fabric A, you need to cut a 5-inch square and then also an 11.5-inch square that will be cut diagonally. And those are going right there. That fabric is kind of our theme fabric here, and you can see that's occurring there and there. So I've got one of those cut out. So for what our purpose is, we're just going to build the project literally by the numbers that are shown here. So there's our piece number 1. You don't really necessarily need to use any basting spray if you kind of want to keep that in position. Let me grab for my needles. I've got the longer, these are the longer clover pins. These are the fine, not the patchwork that I use for piecing. But this is a longer pin. It's kind of a heavier gauge. And I'm just going to put that down there so that it doesn't go anywhere. Piece 2 and piece 3, on our pattern, they're designating those as fabric B, which they're having us cut those to a 2x5, cut it again 2x8. So you understand that you want to just acclimate to your whatever, if you're not going to be using our kit, whatever you consider you want to have your fabric A, B, you're just going to follow these instructions for what size to cut your fabrics. So looking at our project, we can see that our fabric B happens to be the green, and that's going to come right here in this position. So this right here, if this is something I want to show you, I want to point out, this fabric we've cut very, very carefully to be exactly 5 inches square. Let's just measure that, make sure we cut that right. And we did, we cut that right at the 5 inches. And you'll notice this happens sometimes. It's batting, right? It's stretchy. When I put that on there, if it doesn't fill out that corner exactly, you know what? This is all going to work out just fine, because when I place my next fabric on here, I'm just going to get that in position as best I can, pin that in place. When I put the next fabric on, which is going to go fabric 2, we're just going to place that right side together, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch here to here, and then we're going to flip. So you see how it doesn't matter if that fabric doesn't go exactly to that line. It doesn't matter because it'll be taken care of with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we'll be sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance throughout the whole project. So we'll just pin this in place and pin kind of shallow. It doesn't need to dig all the way into that background, excuse me, backing. You're just kind of trying to grab a hold of some of that batting. Here, again, we'll go right side together and we will pin. And we'll take this to the sewing machine. It's a lot of fabric, so maybe what I'll do, I might even just pin this into position so it's just kind of out of my way, a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing at this point. And we'll go to the sewing machine and we'll sew our 1/4 inch on both of those, and then we'll come back and use a tool called the roll and press. We'll be doing that instead of ironing, right? I know you want to iron just like I do, and we'll be able to do that a little bit later on. But for now, let's go sew our 1/4 inch seam. So the first thing we'll do here, I kind of just with my finger, did I get this in the right position? And looks good. So again, I know you want to, as quilters, I'm always grabbing for that iron, and we will be able to do that eventually. But I'm just going to roll this and just press this to the outside. If you're inclined and you want to kind of just pin that so that it doesn't kind of roll back and take a tuck, by all means do that. Do whatever's going to help you be comfortable. And we'll just keep these kind of here so they're never going to interfere with our next strip. And I'll just keep that there. Now for our next piece, 4 and 5, same thing. We're just going to lay these right side together, pin in place, and sew our 1/4 inch seam. See how that these don't reach? It's okay. We're going to compensate for it. You know, when June Tailor writes these instructions, they're based on a perfect piece of batting. I don't know if there's any perfect piece of batting out there. And then this is manufactured, and now it's packaged, and it's handled, and it's taken out. So, you know, one thing you can always do is actually measure the length, measure your square. You could specifically cut your fabric to accommodate your piece of batting. I've done that before. Or maybe you just couldn't resist and you iron it and it did shrink. That's okay. Now just measure what you have left over and cut your strips accordingly. So that's an option for you as well. So again, a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you'll turn to the outside and turn the outside. And then you're just following suit. Pieces 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, and you continue on until your entire piece is completed. And I've got that one back here with me, just so that we can jump forward to show you. It's the same process. Now we go, yes, finally I get to iron this thing, right? You can see that we started here, we added here, we added here, here, here. This is that piece now where we talk about some of those being cut. Some are cut on the diagonal, and when that's the case, for example, that is why we're doing that. Because once you've built out this center, this piece, when you get ready to place that on, and I can show you back actually over on this one, I want to show you that. If you haven't worked with a whole lot of triangles, I want to mention this one thing to you. So let's say we've built this whole thing out, and now this piece right here, see how that extends? When you get ready to place this piece here, the thing I want to mention about triangles is you just want the same amount of overhang on both sides. You see how right now that's here and there's all this overhang over there? Just balance that. Come back so that that is more with an equal amount of overhang. If you wanted to measure the amount, you could, but you can just eyeball it. Then when you sew your 1/4 inch seam and you turn this back, it's going to fill in those corners nicely. So that's just one extra thing I wanted to mention about these corners as well as this piece right here. These are just strips and nothing terribly unique about that. So let me get this one out of the way because I want to talk to you about us being able to now trim this up. This is where you're like, okay, how do I trim this up? Remember how I said there would be this overhang? These are the strip sizes that they've told us that we need to include in our pattern. One thing June Tailor's done with their batting that's very helpful is you see this line that extends out beyond? One of the reasons they did that is that's the line that helps us trim up. So I can lay my ruler on these lines, and that's a great place to start trimming this project up. Let me just turn it again and we will line up, and I see that extension right there. It's really along this long side though that it's a little bit harder to see the line, and that's why some people like to trim June Tailor projects up from the back, because now I can consistently see that line. So that's just something that I want to mention to you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and trim up the whole project. When I come back, I want to give you some pointers about binding. Some people have difficulty when there's a 135-degree corner, as there is here, or down in that corner. And I just want to give you some pointers about how we can lay those binding strips kind of back on itself, and it looks really nice and clean and mitered in those kind of compound corners. So I'll clean that up and then I'll be right back. So now we're ready to put our binding on. Look how pretty it is. I got a chance to iron that off camera. So for the binding, we couldn't resist. This is one of the fabrics I actually requested P&B print specifically for us. Bless their heart. I'm like, you have to have a red stripe with a holiday collection, and they did that. I love that. So you may have your favorite binding technique. If you're already so secure with binding, that's what you're going to do at this point. You really don't need to keep watching. It's just binding. But some people are like, I'm not really comfortable with that. I'm used to a quilt that has 90-degree corners. How do you negotiate this? So that's what I want to cover here, is how we work with that. So once you have your binding put together, by the way, I know in June Tailor's patterns, they mentioned 2 1/4-inch strips. I like 2 1/2-inch strips personally. One of the reasons I like that is I know that a table runner, I use my table runners. I've had spilled sauces, spilled drinks, spaghetti sauce. I use these things. So for that reason, I machine stitch down all of my binding. And when I do that, I want to make sure I'm always stitching it from the front. And wrapping it, of course, to the back, and then stitching it down from the front again. I don't want to miss that back. And I have found when I cut my strips to 2 1/4, they're really tight. And when I do machine binding, when I put that down by secure it, I've missed that at 2 1/4. So if you're going to hand tack it, 2 1/4 will work. But if you think you want to machine tack down your binding, you might want to think about the 2 1/2. So my technique with binding, never start in a corner. I'm going to be finishing the binding probably somewhere on the side, and I'm going to leave a really big beginning where that can happen a lot of distance because of the technique I like to use for my binding. So I'm just going to leave this big area open and really kind of start clipping here. I think what we'll do is we're just going to start filming, and then when we get down to this corner, we're going to try to get some close-up photography, but I'll explain to you right now what I'm going to do. Once I get to this place, and I wish I had a little bit of a marking tool here. Let me see if I've got one in the drawer. I don't think I have one with me, but what my goal is you could stitch all the way to this edge. It's going to make it much more difficult to fold back. I like to stop about 1/4 inch away from that exact corner and back stitch there. Then I'm going to fold my binding back until it's kind of continuing this visual line, this direction, and then I will lay it back on itself. Just like that. And you can either come right off the edge or start at that same point, come down. Again, as smooth as you can be, stop 1/4 inch away, about right there, back stitch, roll that back onto itself. So it's always traveling in the direction that you will be. It's running parallel. Fold it back on itself and keep going. So, but I want to demonstrate that on the sewing machine so you're seeing that close up. It's sometimes easier to show you what you're going to be looking for. But let's head over to the machine and we'll get started. If you have a walking foot, I'd recommend you use it. I'm using a 1D now. I was using a 97D for my 1/4 inch seam. Now this is my 97D, and I have a dual feed is engaged, a great feature of BERNINA. Any presser foot ending with a D for BERNINA are dual feed, and that's what this unit is right here. It's an incredible kind of, it's just fabulous, so that these are engaged and this is engaged, and they act like a walking foot all the time. I love it. All right, let's get started with our 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm kind of looking right now. If I had a marking tool, I would mark on this with a friction pen. But I kind of have my eye on where that's going to be. Probably about right there. I'm going to actually cut my thread right now, because I'm going to turn toward you. See that right there? I am pulling that back. I'm going to now fold it back on top of itself, just like this. You might even want to clip that. I will clip that right there. And I'm going to come right off the edge so you see this option. So I see that coming. I'm going to stop 1/4 inch where I think was 1/4 inch. I might have gone long. We'll check it out. So again, we will lay this back. I want you to see this. See that right there? That's extending. We will fold this back onto itself. You never want to make it too tight in that corner. I've seen that with quilts, and it almost creates a curve in the corner when you do that. It needs to have plenty of space to have a nice miter. And now we continue sewing. So I'm going to keep going with my binding. I want to show you how to finish this binding. I think that's one of the greatest challenges, and so I want to go over that with you. So I'll get us to the point where basically I come over here, and I'm going to really kind of stop, so we have this big area here where we're able to show you a really cool technique of how to finish this up. So I have attached my binding to the project, and now I have this big gap. You really want this big gap. My miss when I put binding on is making too small of an opening, and it makes it much more difficult. So I've got these 2 long flaps. Don't trim anything. This is going to be your best friend right now. This is just one way to finish a binding. So I'm going to lay that. I've got my wool pressing mat underneath my project, as you can see, and I'm going to lay this back now on myself. You can see I've been sewing. I've got threads on me, but hey, that's how you know we're quilters, right? I'm going to lay this back onto itself and do the same here, where I kind of have the same amount of the tail, so to speak. So as if this was sewn down, I kind of smooth it, and they come right to each other. I'll just work on one side at a time. I'm going to give that a really good press. You want to see this crease. That's going to be very important, and I'm hoping if I can get my head out of the way, you can see the crease. That's going to be my visual target. And I'm just laying that back on itself right here. It's doing the same thing. Now, if you look at this, we just want this to appear as one continuous strip. So if we kind of look at this and say, all right, well, I've got this fold here, and I think you can see that pretty strongly. I want to fold that back. Hopefully you can see that. That's the line right there. I'm going to fold this actually back on itself. It's a little bit easier for me to do it this way. And I'm going to press that again. And you can see that if we do the same thing with this piece right here, so you see that really strong crease, I'm going to fold this fabric back, just like that, because I really, really, really want to define that place. What we're going to do is join those two places. These two things, as you can see, if we lay them out and we join them, we'll join our strip, all right? So now, this is where kind of bringing the project in, and I kind of, it's relieving the pressure, so to speak, the kind of drag. I want to bring this in, and we can even just clip it together. That's fine with some pins. Because what needs to happen right now is these new two pieces need to be joined. The easiest way to do that, when we kind of look at what we're trying to get accomplished here, is that this is sewn to this, is that we simply place them right side together. So let me turn this around. So you see that really strong, those two really strong lines? That's what we're trying to line up right now. So if I lay this down, you can see that. I'm just trying to stack this one exactly on top of that. That's all I'm doing right now. I'm going to grab my fine patchwork pins now. I want to pin this really well. I don't want anything moving. I might even just pin it out here just so nothing moves, tries to shift on me. And you see now why we needed this big gap. You might even clip the project together just to relieve some of the pressure. There you go. So we're just wanting to make this crease be on top of that crease all the way down. I'm going to shorten my stitch length as well, and I want to add a lot of thread in here because that's where you're joining everything together. And if we're really going to be using these table runners as they're meant to be used, you don't want your project coming apart at that binding. So I'm going to shorten my stitch length to maybe 2 1/4, maybe even something a little bit less. But let's go sew right down that line, back stitch, up. I didn't back stitch before I ended. Let me go stitch that again. I'm going to use this thing. I don't want that coming apart. There we go. Add some thread in there. Now, before you get trim happy, again, true confessions of a quilter, can't tell you the number of times I've done this process actually wrong and gotten a twist in there somehow. So before you get trimming anything away, let's kind of unclip it. See if we're going to have success with what our thoughts of how to join the strips. And it looks like it came out the way what we're hoping for. So the easiest way is you could certainly put this on a mat if you want and get a precise 1/4 inch seam, or maybe even something a little bit bigger. I think I've put my rulers away at this point. I'm just going to eyeball that. And I like to press those seams open just to distribute the bulk. And I notice that's a pretty healthy seam allowance. That's good. Adding again some fabric in there. That's not a time to have a scant 1/4. You don't want that. Now when I open up the project, or when I kind of unfold that, I'm going to press that. See how nicely that lays right there? And yes, I wish those stripes could match perfectly, but where the binding ends, the binding ends. So it's possible maybe you want to have it on a less conspicuous place, maybe down in this region. But there's so much going on with the table runner, I don't think people are going to be focused on your binding, the two stripes not coming together very well. Now you're just going to clip that and continue to sew that down. And I'm just going to do that real quick. I'd like to just finish that up, and I want to just show you some tips and techniques of using your wonder clips to clip everything, especially where those miters are. So let me just stitch that, and I'll be right back. I love this. I love that a project can be, you know, this is, by the time you cut your fabrics, get everything down, easily done, and not even a full day, and I love that. And of course, other coordinating projects you can move on to. Wonder clips are my go-to with binding. It's so much better than pins. I used to do all my binding with pins, and I'd try to pin the whole thing, and then as I'm sewing it, they're catching on my clothes. It just grab those wonder clips. There's the mini, but then there's the full size. With the batting here, I think the full size, regular size wonder clips are better. So with this, you can, I've seen people press that if they are inclined to do that. I don't necessarily feel that is a necessary step, but if that's you would do that at this point. And then you're just rolling this to the back, and that's where the wonder clips are going to come in. Be sure to put the clear side down, color side is up, because you're going to be stitching in here. Now, I would be absolutely grabbing for probably a natural color here, because that's going to probably be your best option. You're going from red to green to kind of a cream. Something, though, that would do well with all of those colors, and you're just going to clip. Now, when you get to this corner, you can roll this edge under here first and kind of secure that. And then this one, it might be easier for you to see this actually from the back, right? Because here we're going to come in like this to clip that from the back. And now you can roll that over. I sometimes, well, almost always, manage my miters from the back of the project. It seems like I can organize the project a little bit better here and then clip. If you're going to do that from the back, your clear will be on the upside. Or you see how now it's set up for this corner. So again, coming into this corner here, we would just clip, clip, clip. Clip right here. Do one side of your miter and clip it. And then fold this over the top, just like that. And go ahead and put a clip right in there. So look how great that looks. It's just a perfect 90-degree corner. I know when I hear feedback from people say I struggle with binding. So hopefully those tips and techniques are helpful. So you will just continue to clip. And as I mentioned, I'd be loading this with a color that's going to work with everything. Knowing that I want to stitch in the ditch. And my technique for that is really just when you're going to the sewing machine, be sure your machine is loaded with whatever color thread, either if you're doing this kit or maybe something with your own fabric. I kind of just want to pull back my binding. And the idea is just to sink that stitch right in that valley, go slow, stop with your needle down, pivot, and come the different direction. And now you have, with that extra, remember we talked about that 2.5-inch binding? That's why. See how I know now that if I stitch right there, I will absolutely catch that binding on the back, and of course that's the goal. So really fun. I love the June Tailor projects. I love that they're done in a day, and I can be displaying them later on that evening. So hey, if you know a friend that might enjoy this video, be sure to share that with them as well. It's the holidays, right? What a great time to be able to display all of our beautiful table runners and all those dishes that we bring out just at Christmas time. Hey, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do that, and I'll see you soon on another Shabby video.